There's a long history of immigrants coming to the United Kingdom, settling in London, having certain neighbourhoods. So, for example, Jewish people in the East End of London, some parts of the East End were very important for early Jewish people.
I was more myself though still.
There were parts that were very identified as Irish communities. There's Little Dublin in the East End. Now, where I live in London is a very French area. There's a lot of French-speaking people there, a lot of Arabs. Now, that's just part of how a big metropolis works. And also, don't mistake London for the rest of the United Kingdom. All right, the level of the melting pot going on in London is not the same as what might be going on in the north or somewhere else. So we've got to get things in perspective, I think. I mean, people used to, the thing is, there's always a section in Britain, there's always a reactionary section, which I think I identify this gentleman here with. I'd like to hear your views more on this, but it seems to me that you're a reactionary in this way. There's always, we've got to blame the non-conformists, or the, going back even to medieval times, the Flemings who are taking over the wool trade, you know? We've got to blame the Catholics. We've got to blame the Irish. You know, there was the Gordon riots against Irish Catholics in the 19th century. There's always that minority which provide a very good scapegoat.
Yeah, but these minorities, when they arrive, do post pogroms.
Sorry? They do post pogroms, do they?
Do post pogroms. I mean, say if you take the Russian Jews that arrived at the turn of the century, you had, due to their arriving, the Tottenham outrage, the Houndsditch murders, you know, quite notorious in the time.
So I'm not saying that immigration is always like peaceful and it doesn't have, you know, certain side effects. Especially, like I said, when you have a quite nationalistic country like Britain, there's no point denying that there's
half a minute. It's not nationalistic. Look, these Russians came here, and in the middle of a bank robbery, they shot a policeman and shot a 10-year-old boy.
This is not an argument against immigration. This is not an argument against immigration.
Those two people and those 6 policemen at the Houndsditch murders, they would still be alive today, but they would be very long dead.
No, I don't know if that's true. To be honest, like,
what's wrong with it then?
Well, you're like most people at Speaker's Corner. You take too much. You derive too many conclusions from too little evidence. So you give 2 cases of murders being done by immigrants, by Russian Jews at the beginning of the century, and then you use that as an argument to say, well, there is some kind of ethnic cleansing going on.
No, those are 2 of
That's not true.
No, those are 2 of the most notorious.
That's a massive exaggeration.
The 2 of the most notorious ones.
Which,
you know, if you just look it up in Wikipedia, you can do it just now.
So what? I mean, this is terrible. But so what?
No, I'm just trying to keep in.
What? So what? Do you agree with this man that, you know, immigrants are ethnically cleansing Britain of British people? Is that what you're saying?
I think that would be the.
Is that what you said? What did you say then? Clarify what you said. I'm sorry if I misunderstood. What were you trying to say? Listen, the working classes are being pushed out of places like London by Tory governments committed to making London a city for the rich and for older people, and actually certain high-class migrants from other countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, China. That is what is going on in London right now.
That's very eloquently put.
It's not a migration thing of us versus them. It's a class-based thing. So this gentleman has a point. The working classes don't have a place in London anymore. That's the general belief. Since the 80s, since London has moved away from having light industry and so on, it's become more of an office environment. There's a belief, well, why do we need these sort of dregs from before? You know, from the industrial period. Just get them out. Get poor people out. Or you know what? Until they leave, we can just have them living in sheds, paying £350 a month to live in a fucking shed in East London. That's what young people can sort of reckon with. A lot of them have to deal with now. This is affecting even people like me, middle-class Londoners, who are relatively financially secure.
Good.
This is going to affect me as well. It's not just a working class thing.
Isn't the political answer always going to be the same if those people are not here?
Sorry?
Isn't the political answer always going to be the same? If everybody sort of just backed off and said, oh, we're not going to go to war, but there's nobody there to sort of back it up and say, no, we don't.
Well, there are people. What do you think I'm here to Speaker's Corner to do? I might reach maybe 20 or 30 people, but I'd rather meet them face to face and give what I see as the truth to them and get them to think about what they think is the truth. I'd rather do that here in front of a small crowd rather than, you know, run to be an MP and, you know, play the game. It makes much more sense to reach the people directly.
I think.
And
what about this thing about London? I think you should become an MP.
A lot of Londoners know the truth.
Very good.
They know what's going on in their city. They know their city is not being ethnically cleansed by Muslims and immigrants or Roma or, you know, black people, they know that what they're worried about, most Londoners, rational Londoners, I think, they're worried about social cleansing. They're worried about poor people being kicked out, London being made a city for rich people. Do we really, I asked the question, I'm specifically talking to people here native to London.
Yeah.
But if you live in a city like New York or Berlin, you might have similar experiences as well. Do you want London to end up the same way as Paris?
Yeah.
Do you really want that? Do you want that kind of division, that social division? Do you really want a donut city where the centre is a sort of soulless commuter, one big commuter office, let's face it, and the rest of the city has kind of, well, we keep a few brown and black people to come in and do our cleaning and our laundry and so on. Do we really want that kind of environment? And then when those brown and black people get angry, they have riots, which they quite, maybe not justifiable, but quite understandable. Do we really want that?
Yes, because it's out in the open.
You might, someone like this might want that. Someone like this, who's happy with Britain being the #2 arms dealer in the world, who's happy for there to be a British Empire.
I'm not happy with Britain being
right
#2 arms dealer. We should be #1.
They might be happy with it, but I ask you to think to yourself what you would be happy. What kind of city you want? Do you want a good city? Do you want a good city that's open to everybody?
I want a city,
or do you want a city
where
that's
two
only
trades
closed
are
to the rich
grown up
and people who play the capitalist game, who are happy to slave away and to waste their lives?
Why don't you talk about building regulation and how it's because of the Labour Party and their strict regulations and why we can't build more homes?
Building regulations are not set by the Labour Party right now because the Labour Party is not in power. Right now what's happened is, recently I read in the news that the Tory Party has tried to now eliminate building regulations on the height of the buildings in London. And now this is another question as well. Do we want London, okay, I asked you before, do we want London to end up as socially divided as Paris? Now I have to ask, do we want London to end up as grotesque as New York, where buildings go up for miles into the sky, where you can't even see the sun, where if you go and walk in certain parts of Central Park in New York City, the temperature actually drops because the shade from these huge buildings is so high. Do we really want more shards? I think horrendously ugly buildings like the Shard.
It's not completed yet.
Do we want humanly scaled buildings? Buildings, maybe not. Maybe, I'm not saying all buildings should be 1 story. Maybe 5 stories maximum.
Yeah, but even
6 stories. Do we want buildings that are humanly scaled, that respect Londoners? Don't make them feel small.
Yeah,
why not?
I think that's what most people want in London.
Why not if that's their offices they work in?
One second. Sorry?
Sadiq Khan is even against that.
Listen, I'm not a fan of Sadiq Khan. I'm not a fan of Sadiq Khan. I'm not a fan of people like Nick Clegg, David Cameron. They, like I said, they care more about their own survival than office. They're statesmen. They care about statecraft and how to manipulate public opinion to get behind certain things, right? And to bolster their own positions. This is why you have people like Boris Johnson pandering to reactionaries like Eric right here, giving little mean comments about Muslim people. This is why you have, people, pandering to these kind of prejudices, right? Now, that's not the kind of Britain.
They're not
Britain I want to
prejudices,
live in.
they're facts. They're facts that London Underground has been bombed several times by Arabs and Islamists.
London Underground has been bombed several times by Islamists. Okay, this is interesting. I'll recommend a fantastic book to you all by a guy called Mark Curtis, who wrote a book called Secret Affairs, Britain's Collusion with Radical Islam. And in it he used to work for Chatham House, which is the leading establishment think tank for foreign policy. He actually points to the case where the London bombings in July were actually another case of blowback. I'm not denying the responsibility of those men who went on the underground and blew themselves up. That they have personal responsibility and that what they did was wrong. But I think we should also be aware of how Britain helped to create the conditions for those kind of men to get to where they are. The Pakistani state has been a long ally. Hold on, let me finish. The Pakistani state has been a long ally of the United Kingdom. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, 2 biggest sponsors of radical Sunni Islam in the world, right? They're now promoting the Wahhabization of mainstream Sunni Islam, right? Wahhabi is the fundamentalist brand of Islam, not the more liberal kind, but the reactionary kind. Now, they were happy for Pakistan to say to the cameras, yeah, Pakistan, we're going to try and clamp down on terrorism, all the meanwhile turning a blind eye to terrorist training camps being set up in the northeast of the country. They were happy for that to happen. Britain had no problem with that at all. What Gordon Brown did, this is another case in point. Gordon Brown was happy just to say to Pakistan, yeah, please work with us against terrorism. say that to the cameras and then to go about business as usual, to let these Pakistani jihadis train up. This is the reality. If you read authors like Mark Curtis, you start to see the British state and radical Islam are actually very close together. And I'm not talking about letting all Muslims in, all right? Listen, even if, like, letting in increasing Muslim immigration to Britain is not going to threaten us with more Islamist terrorism.
Yes, it would.
But collaborating with Islamist governments like Saudi Arabia, like Pakistan, that's going to lead to more terrorism. By allowing these states to continue promoting their, ridiculous ideas. I mean, if you hear some Saudi Arabian countries, they have debates about whether or not women should wear bras, and whether or not we should be allowed to do applause. This is the kind of country.
No, that's Manchester University.
This is the Whitehall conception of democracy.
No, that's one. That, whether we should clap or not is Manchester University, the students there and its staff. But okay. But now let's go back to your argument about Islamists. Now, if these people that were over here were really against British foreign policy, what they would have done was go up, "Hello, Mr. Bear," bang. But they didn't. They bombed ordinary people in the ordinary street. So, look, Ali's. Look, you know Ali over there. His solicitor, was one of those people killed.
Because this is not a discussion, Eric. I can talk to you about this later. Try and keep.
Oh, it is a discussion.
I see your point. No, I see your point about these men. If they were serious about attacking British foreign policy, they would have attacked the Prime Minister. Well, yeah, there's some truth in that. A lot of these sort of radical Muslims who attacked, British people, they did it on the grounds that, well, the British people voted for Blair to get into the office in the first place. They voted for Blair and they're happy with the Iraq War, therefore they're valid targets. I see that as a disgusting logic, because the British people overwhelmingly, I think, were not happy with the Iraq War. Millions of them came out to march against it.
I was one of them.
You were one of them. So this was across the political spectrum as well, not just leftists, but a lot of British people were angry about it. So this idea that they're valid targets is ridiculous. But now we've got to ask the question about, we have to look at our own terrorist acts again as well. So when the British state and the American state do drone bombing of civilians in Yemen, in Pakistan, and in Afghanistan, is that not an example of terrorism being conducted against people who have absolutely no say in the,
No, it's killing our enemies.
They're not British. They're not really actually even human if you kill them.
Well, they're not. That's the thing, right? So when Saddam Hussein, before the Gulf War happened, Saddam Hussein was persecuting Kurds and persecuting Shiite Muslims, Shiite Muslim rebels, right, in the south and then Kurds in the north. The media were obsessed with his treatment of the Kurds, because the Kurds kind of look European a little bit. They've got blue eyes and they kind of have a little like Western features. So we saw a lot of people angry at Saddam over that. The Shiite Muslims, on the other hand, they're just shit. They don't matter. You can walk over them like ants. That's how. There's a really as much as I love living in the United Kingdom, I think without realizing, not consciously at all, there is a really racist streak running through British society, especially among the elite. Especially among the elite, not among the general public.
If you bring in a whole load of immigrants, what do you expect?
There's an idea of, well, you know what, all these Bangladeshis working in special export processing zones, sometimes as young as 16, these girls working for 36-hour shifts, they're not really human. It doesn't really matter they're working this hard. So, therefore, that's fine. We can just go on our lives. We don't have to really think about it. If they were white, if they looked like I did, if they had green eyes, white skin, it'd be a very different kind of reaction. It's just a fact.
No, but it's true.
Capitalism does have a racist component to it, I think. Not always, but in this day and age it does.
Beauty standards everywhere you go around the world. People like pale skin and like lighter shade of eye color. Everywhere you go, this is not just.
That's not true.
Oh yeah.
That's not true.
It's true in India.
This is why I'm so grateful I read anthropology. Anybody who's got ideas like this need to read anthropology. There was an island in the South Pacific where women, sort of darker skinned women, these women had a curvy idea of beauty. And the moment they were exposed to Western advertising, their whole idea shifted, and they started developing all kinds of narcissistic traits and worried about how they appeared, became very insecure about their weight. We can't underestimate the power of the media to distort our perceptions.
It's got nothing to do with Western colonialism, blah blah blah. This is beauty standards that go way back, even before Western imperialism. Like he mentioned India, for example. In India, it's still like that. Even before the colonialists came, it was like that. right? Because they had a caste system.
Can
So
I
how
tell
do
you
you
something?
respond to that?
Can I give a possible reason as to why this might be?
Why?
It might be because paler features and lighter skin and lighter eyes, they are rarer among the world population.
Yeah, exactly.
And whatever tends to be rare tends to be more attractive. As a not always, but all else being
Well,
equal.
albinos
For
are
example-
even rarer.
For example,
and
I read an
they're
article.
hated in several parts of the
I read an article saying about men with beards being considered more attractive by women today in Britain, and very likely you can see if all those men, because they're in the minority, it's not fashionable to have a beard at all.
Soy boys around. That's
Well, I tell you what, moustaches are even rarer, and I have no luck.
When those men go back to being the majority again, when it becomes fashionable for men to be wearing beards in the majority, it'll go back to being clean-shaven people. So, you got to think often what's rarer, what's more novel, the human eye finds interesting. The reason why I generally get quite good audiences at Speaker's Corner is because I'm not saying Jesus loves you, and I'm not saying, I'm not saying Britain is a wonderful place to live in. No, I'm saying things like the United Kingdom government is a leading terrorist organization. People hear that, and they think, that's novel, that's different. I don't hear that often.
Well, I hear it all the time. What are
And
you on about?
they might think in their minds, well, it might be completely untrue. This guy might be spreading complete lies. But either way, they want to find out what leads a person to say that. So I've got to think novelty is often what attracts human beings. The search for new ideas, different ideas that test your assumptions. And I will stand by what I said. The United Kingdom government is a leading terrorist organization. And the British people don't have. Excuse me, sorry.
US.
Oh, well, listen.
Any capitalistic country.
Listen, the United Kingdom is the US is bulldog. This is exact. I mean, just as France is the
Poodle
United
is
States
usually the
poodle.
word used.
You got to think all of the things I'm talking about, British and French aggression against African and Middle Eastern countries. All of these things happen in the context of American power. There was something that the sort of strategists in Washington talked about. I think it was called full spectrum dominance is what they talked about. We'll not only have troops on the ground and bases across the world. We'll not only control the world's oceans through our navy, we'll control the sky through drones. And the sky is not enough. The sky is not the limit. We'll control space as well, and we'll have weapons in space. I mean, these things about sending a message.
Mars, there's a race. Who's going to colonize? Who's going to be first to colonize?
All of these things, controlling, being the first person on the moon. This is all okay. It is about science and scientific exploration, and that's fantastic. I'm big in favour of that. But we can't see this outside the context of the Cold War.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Facebook page or something.
So I don't have a name, but I
We have noticed.
Excuse me. Sorry. I'll give you this, my friends. I run meetings at Speaker's Corner every Sunday evening. I meet with people right wing and left wing, and we meet at outside the cafe over there. And we go to the Victory Club to have discussions. We can have a.
You have a Facebook page, Mr. Speaker.
I don't have a Facebook page.
What about Instagram?
How can you say you don't have that?
I'm quite socially
This
incompetent.
lady has a question. Here we go again.
Hold on, I can't hear what she's saying. Can you speak up a little bit?
Mention any women.
Don't get him started. with women.
Sorry, hold on. I'm just trying to listen to. Just sit there and look good.
So, you're standing here about 20
Socialism is communism.
And I would say since half the population of the world is female, how do you see our
How do I see women?
the problems of
How do I see the role of women in changing the world? Well, first of all, this is a very interesting topic for me.
You're the mothers of our soldiers.
Yeah.
I said you're the most important. You're the mothers of our soldiers.
The first kind of domination in society, the first form of domination, was the domination of the old by the young, but very hot on its heels was the domination of women by men. And I suspect this has some psychoanalytic aspect to it. The fact that women can bring life into the world. I think men have always been jealous of that. Very deep down, on a very deep level.
They can't do it without.
On a very deep level. Now,
Look, we do the most important part.
putting aside, look at where we are today. After the first, second, third waves of feminism, bringing us first the vote for women, second of all, sexual equality in the 60s, and now trying to understand the role of black women and working class women in the struggle. I have many reservations about the current wave of feminism, especially over the issue of abortion. I'm not so sure about whether I agree with that. But overall, I think it's a good development. Now, Yes, 50% of the planet. I've already spoken about how Bangladeshi women are exploited. This is Bangladesh. The UN did a study of gender parity, and they found out of 109 countries. Guess where Bangladesh was? It was right at the bottom, 108. Now this was a country that
Who's 109?
Women. That's a good question. I think it might be. I think it might be Saudi Arabia. I could be wrong on that, but check that for yourself. No, I could be wrong on that. It might be Pakistan. I wouldn't be surprised if it was those two. But the point is, women are not treated well in these countries. Like I said, young girls working 36-hour shifts, special export processing zones. And now when these women, and when entrepreneurs, when communists, when trade unionists, all these various sections of Bangladeshi society try to organize, they try to get together, maybe form some kind of unions to improve their wages, improve the treatment of women in the workplace. Often women are denied toilet breaks and they have to go to the toilet in their pants because of in these sweatshops. It's horrendous treatment. These women and men who try to organize to make Bangladeshi society a bit better. Do you know what the British response to that is? It's not to say, well, let's give them some support, let's send them some money. No, they send money to the Bangladeshi government and they train up something called the Rapid Action Battalion. The Rapid Action Battalion is a death squad that goes around kidnapping people, torturing them, and killing them if they get in the way of capitalist accumulation. Anybody tries to organize and make life better for women and poor people in Bangladesh. This was happening this was happening in 2010-11. Around the same time, the media were worried about Gaddafi going and murdering people in Benghazi. This was happening in Bangladesh. Britain was arming and training this group. It's not allowed in the media because we're always the good guys, but.
How do you propose, you say England sends money to the death squads, how would you propose England does help?
Well, we could help by sending money to these women and men who are organizing, funding their efforts, or just not supporting death squads. That's a good start. They've stopped doing it now because the situation is flattened out. It's no longer a problem. When they get in the way of progress, when women are fine. Capitalism is not sexist. It's not racist. Unless you can oppress women and oppress black people and brown people into being good tools in a machine. If it does work, then they will promote it. If it doesn't, then they won't. So South Africa, for example, is where I'm from originally. Black people, as long as you were getting diamonds out of the ground and gold and uranium out of the ground, you will be seen as a dog. And if you worked in the mines for 2 years, after that, if you die, then it doesn't matter. We'll just replace you with another one. But the moment South Africa starts industrializing, and you need a partially educated workforce that can understand diagrams and can, be overseers and so on in more complicated workplaces, then apartheid ends. That's how capitalism works. It's very, very flexible. Very flexible. The underlying injustice is the same, but it might change its form. Now, what can men do? I think men have to ask the question. Before we even talk about what oppression of Bangladeshi women, Saudi Arabian women, Egyptian women, just look in Britain, what's going on in Britain, first of all. Start from your own country, if you're a British man. Look at the rate of domestic violence against women. And also, hold on, I'm not saying men never get domestically attacked. Men are victims of domestic violence, and that is a problem as well. But first of all, look here, and even at a more basic level. Now that the feminists destroyed they've destroyed patriarchy, at least like formally. They also what went with patriarchy was chivalry, and the feminists destroyed that as well. Chivalry was the kind of mask that helped men and women cope with the basic sexist structure of the family, right? The sort of chivalry of, it was. I think it probably grew out of a way of certain very clever women trying to use men's pride against themselves to protect themselves from ravages there. Now the problem is the feminists they've gotten rid of chivalry, along with patriarchy, and they haven't really found a way to resolve. They've made men and women come face to face with each other now, and there's a battle of the sexes, and it's going on right till today.
Good.
And now that will take a long time to resolve. The battle of the sexes mostly comes from men's irrational response to women, completely irrational. The women's liberation movement, men have responded really irrationally and in a very frightened way to that. That's still unfolding today, and we're still dealing with it now. In my lifetime, things have massively improved. Since when I first arrived here in 2001, now it's 2018, things have massively improved for women. But a lot of feminists are not doing themselves any favors. So things like the Me Too movement, it has some benefits to it, definitely. But this idea of attacking people before you have evidence of what they've done, that I think is very dangerous. When you get rid of due process, and innocent until proven guilty. You might hate people like this guy, Kavanaugh. You might hate all these guys, but you have to have evidence before you convict someone or accuse them or even say rationally they've committed this crime. You have to have evidence. So does that answer your hold on? Does that answer your question? That's terrible.
The current law means that if we that's not enough.
Listen, it must be incredibly painful if you're a woman and you get raped or sexually assaulted, and then 20 years later you try and bring that person to justice who did it to you, and then you
the
might.
problem is 20 years
Hold
later.
on, you might be frightened to even come out because of what it might do to your reputation, and you may not have any evidence. It must be very difficult. I have empathy for people like that. It must be difficult, but the legal system works the way it does for a reason. The reason why you have to have evidence is because if you didn't, we would have all kinds of witch hunts, all kinds of hearsay, and we would lose justice, basically. Justice would come to an end. And a lot of feminists in the audience might say, well, this is just a white guy saying this. Well, I don't give a shit what they think about me as a person. Just respect the idea of due process. So does that answer your question again? Or?
He's very good at diversion.
Yeah, he's distractingly good looking, and it's like quite hard to. Tell me something. What were you asking before? What were you saying?
I think you've got the wrong narrative here. Like, women have much more privilege now than men in this society. Come on, seriously. I mean, look at the laws. They're so pro-women. It's so easy to make a false allegation. The laws have changed. Men are.
Thankfully.
And likewise, with ethnic minorities.
Things like divorce, yeah, I think men are at a disadvantage, and it is a bit unfair. And I think things like abortion, that might be unfair as well. You know, this thing of like, well, it's a man's baby as well, and he hasn't really got any say in like keeping it or not. That I think is problematic. But overwhelmingly, I'm much happier today with the state of women in Britain than I was when I first came here as a child. It's much better today. The privilege, it's this idea that women are more privileged than men. That's again, it's an irrational response.
I'm talking about the laws.
The laws.
Yeah, I'm talking
No, I don't think the laws necessarily favour men. The laws don't favour women over men. Generally speaking, the laws do not favour women over men. In specific instances, they might do, and you might think that's unfair, and you should lobby and do what you can to change that if that's what you believe. But
you don't believe it, though.
I do believe in the law. Sorry.
Men are threatened by women. In the United States alone, more women graduate from universities than men do. More women are becoming doctors. More women are becoming lawyers. The whole works. Men are threatened by women because they haven't taken care of themselves.
Yeah,
we men have not taken care of ourselves.
Do you know what? My favourite feminist, Bell Hooks, said this. She had this advice for men. She said, look at yourselves first. Don't even look at the way you're treating women. Just first of all, look at yourself. The way men treat each other. The reason why men dominate women on the certain fringes of society in Britain and across the world, thank you, and around the world, is because men dominate each other. They repeat the behaviour they do to each other onto women. So when I went to, this is partly the schooling system. The schooling system between the United States and Britain is very similar. I think your infrastructure in some places is terrible compared to ours, but overwhelmingly they're the same. They both come from Prussia originally, and the schooling was designed to make people into cogs in a machine. Make people take a rural population like the United States and bring them into the factories and industry. That's really what it was about. And in the process, some of the worst aspects of masculinity got heightened. So the drive to compete got heightened because you had to set different cogs in the machine against each other. Otherwise, they might work together and create freedom and share things among each other. No, they had to set men against each other. And I saw this in my secondary school. I had a horrible time at school.
I can believe that.
I had a terrible time. But even if I didn't, even if I had a relatively good time, I think I would have seen through the ridiculous system where men are forced to compete with each other over grades, when they're taught to, you know, make fun of each other's physical appearance. There's a sort of competitive aspect which I find horrible. Now, this is where we need more of a feminine voice. Women are much better at working together, cooperating.
Oh, what rubbish.
They tend to be much more likely to cooperate. Listen,
women hate each other.
I know that. Yeah, women compete, especially women compete over men. I'm aware of that, but they don't compete as a matter of course. Men, they have such an insecurity. This gentleman's put hit the nail on the head. There's such an insecurity among men. There's such it is a generalization, but that's what social critics do. They make generalizations, and I think this is a valid generalization. A lot of the time, the male sense of self-esteem comes from whether or not he's beating others. Women often measure their success against their personal achievement. Men measure it against others. So they measure it against other men. I only feel good about myself if I'm beating someone else. And you can beat other people in a million different ways. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be like Speaker's Corner. Why do you think Speaker's Corner is such a masculine space? Because it's so competitive. There's a drive to prove yourself. I can only feel smart about myself. I can only feel secure in my intelligence if I've shown how this guy's an idiot. This is unusual. Can I just point out, the 30 or 40% of the people in the audience here are women. This is unusual, and this is about midday Speaker's Corner. Come back here in about 4 or 5 hours, and this is gone.
They're not interested though.
Well, it's different. I encourage you to stick around. We'll go away along Oxford Street and then come back later. Maybe. I don't know about that. Because most people at Speaker's Corner are Muslims, and Muslims don't generally drink. So it's not about alcohol. But that thing about male insecurity, it's something we've got to overcome. Before we even start confronting the issue about how men treat women, we've got to look at how men treat each other. This obsession with competing with other men, trying to prove yourself. You've got it all wrong. Because it affects relationships as well. It affects relationships. Like, your generation maybe don't have this problem, but my generation have this problem of always, which partner is making more money? Which partner, this is the worst one, the most toxic one, which partner is giving more to the relationship? It's a sickening, like, competitive ideology which is impressed on us. And I'm not saying it's not impressed on women as well, they have it as well. But it's mostly on men. And I just gave it, sorry. That's the kind of man a woman wants. Maybe women need to change their idea of what men should be like.
Why do we talk about that? No, do you speak about that for a bit?
Listen, she's not a regular, I'm going to privilege her over you.
No, you're privileged because she's white, right?
And she's a woman. And she's older as well. She probably has more to say than both of us. Go on.
No. I mean, so there I think it's easy to kind of sometimes like
and that person says, what do you that's why you don't want to be an MP maybe or whatever.
I don't know.
Because you have more interaction. So it's through your individual interactions with the men.
Yeah. That's how things change. Yeah. Respect for individuality on the basis of human rights, not women's rights or black rights, but human rights. That I think is a much better principle for orienting how you behave in life. If you go away from Speaker's Corner today, or go away from this meeting I've got here, and you forget everything else I've said, I just want you to remember one thing: to be universalistic, to care about people no matter what background they're from, black, white, woman. This might sound like a piety to some of you, or a platitude, but I think it's incredibly important. British, non-British, we're all humans, we can all be citizens, and really contribute to the well-being of the society on the basis of citizenship. This is why I hate identity politics. This idea, there used to be I've been reading about the New Left in the United States, especially about a figure called Murray Bookchin. I really encourage everyone to read Murray Bookchin. He had a lot to say about the New Left. He had a kind of two-sided criticism of it. So, on the one hand, the New Left was opening up all kinds of other conflicts. Traditionally, the Old Left was about workers' rights, specifically working men in the industrial parts of the US and Europe. The New Left was about bringing in other questions, the women's question, black and brown rights, civil rights, and so on. Had a whole different perspective to it. Environmentalism. That was all fantastic because it expanded the field of the left out from just dealing with exploitation to dealing with oppression in general. But now we've swung too far the other way. The pendulum has swung too far the other way, where now we're far more concerned about cultural oppression of this or that particular identity than we are about economic exploitation. We tend to forget economic exploitation in the midst of all this other discussion of women's rights, black rights, and so on. They're both important. There needs to be a balance, I think. You can't just look at one or the other. You might... Sorry, go on.
No, Not in the United States or any of the UK, inequality is out of control.
It is out of control, and there's this perception that America's just, if you meet an American, that by default they must be right-wing or conservative, especially if they're wealthy enough to come to Britain, to have a holiday in Britain. I don't think that's true, because the Americans I've chatted to, a lot of them have this progressive streak in them that goes back to the American Revolution, right back to when they kicked out the British crown and decided they would have their own republic. That's a long tradition that goes right back. And that revolution was heir to our revolution in England in the 17th century. A lot of the same people, the Puritans who led the revolution in England, then went on to emigrate to New England and set up direct democracy, town meetings. That's how, even if you go into Vermont today and parts of Massachusetts, you'll see town meetings where there's direct democracy, and there is a real progressive line, tradition in American Britain. These are the two. Remember, these are the two countries, along with France, that basically invented the idea of a social movement. Basically invented the very idea of social movements coming together to make about change. The first one was the example of the United States, planting liberty trees, and again, the Boston Tea Party dumping the tea in the. Yeah, it's called democracy. And democracy is more than just going to the ballot box and having a vote, although that's important. It's about the conversation, exactly. And this is why I'm so angry when you read about the history of the American government, the federal government, what they've done to deny democracy. So, for example, the Gulf War, which you probably remember, was before I was born. There was no public discussion of the Gulf War before it happened. Before George Bush went in and bombed Iraq and helped to destroy the infrastructure, along with Britain, along with the British government, there was no discussion in the media. There was no asking the American people, the British people, what they thought of that. And what's more, even to this day, a lot of Americans have no idea that Saddam Hussein was willing to negotiate the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. He was willing to have a discussion about that, but Bush rejected it out of hand. A lot of Americans have no idea about this. So I ask, do the Americans really have democracy? Does Britain have democracy? Does France have democracy? The three key countries in the Western world. They don't. Hold on, sorry. It was to show power.
No, because they were going to change the petrodollar to the gold standard. And they weren't going to accept the American dollar.
You say this was just...
Same thing with Gaddafi.
Yeah. Let's not be reductive though. It wasn't just about oil. It wasn't just about oil. A lot of lefties and progressives, they like to say the West only cares about oil, therefore they'll prop up dictatorships in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and stuff. That's actually not entirely true. It was nice to chat to you, too. I hope you guys come back. It was lovely chatting. See you. It's not just about oil.
Didn't they kill the babies?
The babies. It's talking about the Gulf War.
Yeah. Kuwait.
Are you being sarcastic or are you
No,
being serious?
being sarcastic.
Yeah. So this gentleman's highlighting something very true. Now, American people, like British people and French people, are quite peace-loving people overall. Like I said earlier, it takes a lot to get them motivated to fight. Now, one of the things that got them motivated to fight was the media was promoting a story about Saddam Hussein's soldiers going into Kuwaiti hospitals, taking babies out of incubators and leaving them on the floor to die. This had absolutely no evidence that this was true. The woman who said this had happened got on the media. She was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. So that's already enough to get you to question what she's saying, if it's objective. What's more, they looked into it, they found absolutely no evidence that it happened. But this gentleman's right in pointing out that's what got British people and American people angry, and then more likely to support the war. The idea that Iraq might have weapons of mass destruction in 2000s. Sorry?
I said, I think he got you to believe that it's a lie. Because all the people that we fight, they're mad, they're bad, and their troops do atrocious things. Now that has happened.
That's not necessarily true. They might be bad. So someone like Assad is bad, but he's not mad. He's not.
No,
stupid.
I said either bad. You know,
right.
all of them.
But what about us? Do we have mad, bad people in our governments? I think we do. People like Tony Blair and George Bush, fanatical Christians, who had this idea that they were preaching, they believed in almost like a crusade. Sorry? I'm not here to give you solutions. You can find out the solutions for yourself. You're all adults here. I can't see any children. You're all adults. You know what you can do to improve the lives of your friends, family, neighbors, fellow workers even, if you're of that kind of left. You all know what you can do in your life. I don't know you all personally on that level, so I can't tell you what you can do. All I can do is share with you my opinion of the world and try and expose the lies that Parliament has fed the British people far too long. That's what I can do at Speaker's Corner. That's why I come to Speaker's Corner.
Are you from a left-wing organisation here in Britain?
I am actually. I run a small left-wing reading circle with my friend Janosch. We meet on Mondays at a cafe in Kensington, believe it or not. And if you're interested, you can stick around, and I'll be around Speaker's Corner today. If you want me to take your email address, I can add you to the mailing list. But the point is, just pick a cause and stick to it. That's my advice. If you have time, if you care about, say, the NHS, try find a cause that you believe in. Protecting the NHS, for example. If you hate warfare and the arms trade, you can join the campaign against the arms trade. This information is there. These groups are there. These organisations, not just left-wing, but a lot of them quite mainstream. They're all there. You've got to find out for yourself what you're capable of.
I agree with
know what your talents are. Sorry.
That sentiment. There's a slight, and I'm doing things what I believe in myself, but I think there's a slight problem when we all concentrate on the little things that we believe in. It dilutes everyone across the board of problems when we're not stuck together to show our louder voice as we all stick together.
There are two possible solutions to this problem. So the British left it's got numerous different causes. Protecting the human rights of Palestinians, protecting the human rights of Kurdish people in Turkey, opposing British aggression against Yemen, attacking the arms trade, organising workplaces to create unions. There's all kinds of really positive things that the British left is up to, if you care to look. But the thing is that they are kind of divided. They do have all their issues, and you can only fight so many battles. Many people I know, they barely have time to come to Speaker's Corner. So that quite reactionary guy talking to us just now about the curly hair, he barely has. He's over there. He barely has time to come here. I know, because I know him personally. He has a 70 or 60-hour work week. So he has, it depends on what you can do. But the thing about the left, all these different causes, I think eventually there will be more unity, because we've got two issues facing humanity today.
I mean, you saw it when Trump came.
Yeah,
everyone's
exactly.
bringing their own issues.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are two issues that are going to unite the left, I think, in the next 20, 30 years, and hopefully that propel the West to move forward to something more democratic than what we have now. Those two issues are the threat of nuclear war and the threat of climate change. Both those threats are really real. They're not going to affect us. They're not going to affect us down the line or in 100 years, but they're affecting us right now. The United States has come very close to nuclear war with countries numerous times. I'm not just talking about Japan in the 1940s. I'm talking about like the war in North Vietnam. So there was a war against North Vietnam, where a part of the war against North Vietnam, Kissinger actually wanted to threaten the people with a nuclear strike. He tried to suggest this to their government. Richard Nixon wanted to look like, he wanted to give the impression of being mad and unpredictable, so as to try and win the war. Remember, nuclear weapons are being used every day. They may not be being dropped on people killing civilians, but they're being used. The fact that you have them, the fact that you have this highly dangerous weapon is enough to, and to have it in the background, overhanging every negotiation you have with a foreign country. That's the use of nuclear weapons. That's when you threaten to use them. That's the use of nuclear weapons. There was unbelievably. I was shocked to hear this. A British politician. I can find you the name if you want later. He was talking about how we might have to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine against Russia to send a message. Just during the Ukrainian Revolution. I mean, this idea that we can have a limited nuclear war. It's just bizarre. I mean, it's amazing. No wonder so many British people just retreat. They just retreat. They hear this kind of madness from their governments, they just completely withdraw from politics as a whole. They think, how can I possibly change anything when these madmen think that there's a possibility of a limited nuclear war?
Of course, look, in the Falklands, if Mr. Faren hadn't sent down the task force, got a force for it, if she just got a nuclear weapon, bombed Buenos Aires or I don't know any other town in Argentina, that would have been the end of the war.
No, the thing is, if you're trying to use nuclear weapons, you might actually have to use them. Because the thing about having a nuclear so-called deterrent, you have to be willing to use it. Otherwise, it doesn't work as a deterrent. Just think for a second. The logic.
Make it even better as a deterrent.
Keep in mind, all this debate. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn's not willing to use a nuclear weapon. First of all, that's sane and rational. Second of all, think about it for a second. If he says he is willing to use it, that's just one person. But the United Kingdom, like the United States, like Israel, like India, Pakistan, all the other nuclear weapon states, they all have something called delegation. You can read about it from Daniel Ellsberg, who used to work as a nuclear war planner for the United States. They have something called delegation, where they actually give a tremendous amount of power, not just to the Prime Minister, or even his close military aides, but right down to the guys who can launch the attacks. Watch the film Dr. Strangelove, the Stanley Kubrick film. Filmed here in London.
Documentary, isn't it?
It actually gives a very close insight to how it actually works. A guy carrying nuclear weapons in a fighter jet, which Britain has. They actually could launch their own attack. They don't need permission from the British government to do that. So we have it's a much more dangerous situation than you think. All this delegation going on is really risky. At the very least, before we talk about nuclear disarmament, we should just get rid of delegation. Just give the power to launch a nuclear strike back to the Prime Minister, and not have it in the hands of generals, soldiers. That would make a lot more sense. You can't have there's no such thing as a winnable limited nuclear war.
Yes, there is.
There is absolutely no such thing. Let me give you an example of what would happen.
It won the war against Japan.
If there was a limited nuclear war against India and Pakistan, minimum 20 million people would die. I can give you the studies to back this up if you're interested. I never say things that I don't have evidence for. I try to have evidence for what I say. Minimum 20 million people would die. That's like how many Holocausts? Think about that for a second. Now then you might think, well, 20 million is not the whole world. But actually what you would have then is something called nuclear winter. So not only does the blast and the fire and the radiation kill people, but you have a long-term threat of nuclear winter. Do many of you know what that is, or have you heard of it?
Yes, it combats global warming.
The aftermath, so it will hit the weather, food won't grow properly, the water will be contaminated.
So this has to do with crops. Yeah, the smoke from a burning city. So if you burn enough buildings, the smoke from that will go up into the atmosphere and will contain all the heat, and you'll have crops dying. That's possibly the likelihood of what will happen. Now I've said this is quite a shocking thing for people to hear about this. That it was Gavin Williamson, that was the one. People like this are willing to use nuclear weapons in negotiations. A lot of British people hear this, and the madness of this, they start to think to themselves in a very narcissistic way. They start to think, well, we might not be here tomorrow. This might actually happen. So therefore I'm just going to live my life day to day, and I'm just going to focus on everyday survival. And the very language of survival goes right down to everyday life. Of surviving your family. I read a book by John Cleese saying how to survive your family. This kind of language just got. He was another middle-class psychiatrist talking about how middle-class families in America are like comfortable concentration camps. This is the kind of language of survival that we're inundated with. And when everything becomes like this, the idea that we can change things through collective action, that through working together we can make a better society, starts to recede out into the background. And what comes forward is a narcissistic mentality. That's what we're seeing take shape. We only sort of care about your individual survival. Ayn Rand is she's totally mad, completely off the spectrum. If you think that kind of
one of the biggest influences on British and American politics.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, she is. It's not just good enough to attack Western foreign policy. You have to attack the ideology that comes behind it. The ideology that backs it is just as important. So there is, like I said, a streak of racism. This idea that, third world, sort of expendable, can be used as cheap labour, all the rest of it. That is a kind of racist ideology as well, the government has. But there's also the ideology of capitalist accumulation. If you just read what they say themselves, get it from the horse's mouth. They talk about the third world how its resources need to be open to Western companies. Don't get it wrong. The main threat that Gaddafi had towards the West, the main threat that Assad has towards the West now, is that neither of those countries wanted to open up their countries to foreign exploitation by Western companies. They're not nice men, they're horrible men in many ways, but that was their main crime, as far as the Western elite is concerned. It's nothing to do with human rights. The British government could care less about human rights. They only cared about human rights when British people fought for them.
Yeah, they support about 80% of the world's theocratic regimes.
Exactly. There's actually a very clear link. There's a correlation between where Western foreign investment flows and the level of democracy. It tends to be lower in those countries. And it all comes from Whitehall's very centralised idea of democracy. They have a very, they themselves in Britain. So before Libya got bombed, Libya got bombed before there was even a debate about it in Parliament. Or, no, sorry. The initial bombing of Libya happened 2 days after it was put to a vote. Wait, no, let me actually
First bombing of
I'm
Libya.
getting mixed up between Libya and Syria.
First bombing of Libya was before the main war, and a disco or had been bombed in Berlin.
Well, what happened was, sorry, hold on, I just remembered what I was going to say. Libya was bombed before the debate went up in Parliament, but Parliament voted for the attack anyways, right? That's what happened. Violating international law, let me point that out. You can't attack a sovereign country without permission from the United States Security Council, or unless it's in self-defense. That's the only conditions you can do it. With Syria, they started bombing before they even had a debate in Parliament. They started attacking, they started arming jihadis, arming al-Nusra, arming the FSA. It was a very different situation. I keep in mind, I don't think really, it's not even that the West wants to get rid of Gaddafi or Assad. They want to get rid of these men if they go too far. But ideally, they just want to keep them there and get them to do what the West say. So for example, Assad, they could get rid of Assad very easily. As people like Noam Chomsky pointed out, if the West really wanted to get rid of Assad, they could ask Israel to put troops on the Golan Heights. And then that would draw the Syrian army down, and that would relieve pressure from the rebels. And the rebels could do that thing, and they could take over more cities and establish their brand of order. That could very easily do that. When Saddam was gassing Kurds before the Gulf War, Britain had no problem with it. Britain had no issue with it at all. Then when Saddam started gassing Kurds, and it was politically expedient for us to oppose him, then we started branding him as a Hitler. Meanwhile, over the border in Turkey, they're doing the same thing to their Kurds. Britain has no problem with it there. Britain has no problem with Turkish ethnic genocide. Britain has no problem with Israeli ethnic genocide against Palestinians. They have no problem with the very anti-Semitic Zionist ideology. Zionism completely contradicts Judaism. If you read the Torah, it says that if you're a Jewish person, you should only return to the land of Israel once the Messiah has come. And the Messiah hasn't come. So Zionism is in direct contradiction to... But Britain is happy to support these ideologies, as long as they support, the interests of Western elites, big companies, access to oil, access to resources. Then they're happy for it. I know you can change things. There's a general assumption that you can't change things. But all of you have something called an indifference threshold. All of you have a sense of self, no matter how minimal and minimized, in order to cope with everyday survival. You all have an indifference threshold. After a certain point, it'll be broken. Something might happen to you too, where you might lose your house to get evicted, and then you might start to think, how can I join a renters union to try and get some justice? It may take some time, especially middle class people like us, assuming the way you're dressed, that you are like this, that we tend to be better off and more comfortable and sheltered, so we're less likely to want to join change. But when it starts to affect us, we're more likely to get into action, and we educate ourselves. This is how things change. That's the only thing that's ever made things better for humanity. Collective action. Nothing else has ever changed things. Only when people work together can they change things. It's the reality, it's how it works.
Yeah, that's why we've got an army.
Exactly, give them all population.
You can see the twinkle in his eye that he's trying to... You don't provoke me, Eric.
No, I'm not out to provoke. It's actually, the reason I stayed on actually rather than just go sign on, I wanted to pick you up about the basic difference between men and women. This was pointed out to me by a woman. I'm on jury service, and this woman put it. She said, men, I've seen them at meetings, they go to see each other, hammering songs, then afterwards, want to have a drink? Yeah, sure, and go up and have a drink together. Women, if they have an argument, one of them comes out and says, you wait, you bitch, I'll get you. And that is kind of like a poison between the whole of their relationship. And I think this is part of what you've left out.
Women have less tolerance for that kind of behaviour.
Oh, hello. How you doing? Fine, thanks. It's a matter of tolerance. Actually, the case I'm on, should discuss the case.
Yeah, maybe don't. I don't want to hear about your work life, to be honest.
No, I was just going to point out.
No, sure. I just better to keep those things.
Yes, yeah, quite right.
Confidentiality.
Yeah. So this is about this.
It's true what I'm saying, isn't it? About men and women.
Yeah, I like the point of chivalry.
Chivalry.
Yeah, I think it's kind of
Guys, it was nice to chat. I'm really glad.
I bought that book, which I watched some of your videos online, the Propaganda Blitz one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, so
I'm so happy you did. Oh, that's so good to hear.
That was,
I brought it with me today, actually. I'm so glad
I'll see you again, man.
Listen, come back. I want to hear what your thoughts are. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Take it easy. Sorry, go on. What
yeah, no, I just like the point about the chivalry that in the past it kind of set some kind of frames for men and women relationships, and now it kind of everything. So yeah, and I think that it's this tension how those relationships should be now between men and women. Yeah, of course, in the past a lot of men used to abuse it, and yeah, but I think that it kind of sometimes feminism backfires to women, I think.
Yeah, it does, without realizing. I mean, there's an idea in Hinduism that every action creates a positive and a negative.
Yeah.
So there was the positive feminism, which was the obvious things. Don't need to talk about them. But then the negative.
Yeah.
I guess they weren't aware of what would happen when you get rid of chivalry.
Yeah.
Like I've had so many relationships with women which are so like combative and like kind of aggressive from both sides, because there is this just lack of chivalry.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't really know how should they behave now when those kind of rules and regulations from the past seems to be kind of demolished.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we feel at lost a little bit how those relationships should be.
Have you ever seen the movie Pride and Prejudice?
Obvious,
yeah,
of course.
I think everyone has seen it.
Yeah.
There's a really good scene. I watched I watched an interview on the special features with Matthew McFadden. This is the modern one.
Yeah.
And he says, I really liked working on the film because you always knew what to do.
Yeah.
He said, when a woman comes in the room, you stand up.
Yes.
When you're dancing with a woman, it goes like this. The man does this, the woman does this. He said, now you just don't know what to do.
Yes.
a
Because
lot
one woman will thank you for kind of, letting her go first, and the other will tell you off. That's, it's another world.
Oh, but now that thing of opening doors, that's like women do it for men now as well.
Yeah.
It's lost its
But
significance.
on the tube, some time ago, it was very crowded. I was sitting down, this woman and got up, gave her a seat, and she gave me a right mouthful, and I said, which is apparently wrong, I'm sorry, I thought you was pregnant. And
fuck's sake, Eric, of course you did.
What?
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I think you've come here before to Speaker's Corner. I've seen you. Have I seen you before here?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Right. I mean, hey, you dog. This man he's a gentleman. He treats women really well. We're just talking about chivalry.
Are you here every Sunday or usually? Okay, see, I just came in the middle of your talk, so I just want to ask.
Did you miss my talking about women then?
Sorry.
Did you miss what I was saying about women before?
Probably yes. I came just before the chivalry thing.
Okay. Oh right. Well, a woman. Well, I was giving a speech about terrorism in the world. How to make the world better, and then this woman said to me, she said, you've spoken for 20 minutes, you've never talked about women. And I was like, okay. I mean, fair enough. I said, I said a little bit about women, and I talked about chivalry. And they used to be, so feminists, they attacked patriarchy, the rule of the man and all this, so they got rid of that. But then what they didn't realize is they got rid of chivalry as well. The thing that chivalry was what kept the patriarchy in place, because it gave some rules for men couldn't treat women too badly. They could treat women badly, but not too badly. Then she said, well, I said there's some consequences of that, because now it brings men and women face to face, and there's no like rules to govern their relationship. They can have, like that woman who Eric said, how he got up to a woman on the train, and she got really angry because she thought he was being patronising, patriarchal.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think of all of this then? As a woman,
Yeah, so I wouldn't be angry for a man if he gives up his seat for me. I would just thank him.
You don't sound like you're from Britain.
No, I'm from Poland.
Yeah, slightly. I mean.
Yeah, I think
slightly different.
It is slightly different. Yeah.
I mean, in the average Polish family, I think men aren't like super, but they are. I think the father does have more of a place in the family than in Britain. The father basically doesn't exist in Britain.
Really?
Oh yeah.
He exists, but he doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I think it's more farther to east.
Around the around the father, around the
the dad has much more of a presence, and like he's like more of a guide. I think he teaches you more like things you need to learn.
Yeah.
He doesn't just leave it over. Although I think Polish women and Ukrainian women are like pretty tough people. They don't need necessarily a guide to help them, but it's still like it's very interesting trend. Yeah, it's a completely different, I think.
Yeah.
But Polish women are treated pretty well overall, I think.
Yeah.
Like compared to.
I would say so. Yeah.
Because I mean, to be honest, it was partly because of the Russian, like when they were occupied. But Russia made a lot of efforts to like try and equalise men and women. So it was partly because of that.
Did they?
Yeah, man, they did. There was a really concerted effort by the Bolsheviks to, almost right the way through, to basically try and get women to become scientists, engineers, doctors. They wanted to like even out the, it was part of the rhetoric of like internationalism, human rights. A lot of it was bullshit, right? That was.
Yeah, it is.
So a lot of the traditional structures of Eastern Europe, they're very patriarchal structures, but they tried to attack them and bring them down.
They tried to attack all the structures of Eastern Europe. So
everything, the religion, the culture, the music.
Might as well destroy this structure as well. That's what they thought.
Yeah, in Latvia. Now apparently in Latvia the language has almost disappeared, like the native language.
Traditional language.
Yeah, I mean it's like that's partly because of the Soviets.
Yeah.
They just never really
definitely because of this.
Content over everything from your man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Here's the prophet speaking. He says, sing to Hashem. The prophet is saying, sing to God, and he's now talking who should sing to God. And he mentions these people in the wilderness, people in Kedar. No. Show me where it says the prophet came to Kedar.
No. He said, let me break it down.
You cherry picked one word.
No, let me break it down. Those who go down to see the wilderness and cities will lift their voices. The open cities where Kedar dwell. This means that someone will come to where Kedar dwell.
Where does it say someone will come? It says, where Kedar dwells.